It is Stocktober, it's time to start stocking our pantries, and these are 5 recipes for canning that stock up your pantry so quickly. We are going to dive into each of these items, how versatile they are, and I'm going to show you how to can each one of them. Starting out, the first thing that I would can if I'm trying to stock up my pantry quickly is chicken, and there are multiple ways to can chicken, mainly being raw pack or hot pack. And honestly, if you're trying to stock up fast, go for raw pack. It cuts out a lot of steps. So the difference being raw pack, you can just pack all of the meat into the jar and then put the lid on it and stick it in the canner. No water added, no broth added, no nothing. You could put some spices in if you want to. Honestly, I don't even do that. I just do that after I open the jar. And it is such a quick way to get chicken on your shelf. The alternative is hot pack, which of course is just as equally great at getting chicken on your shelf, but you have to boil the chicken first, which I feel like lets some of the flavor out into that water, and then you have to add water to it or broth, and it's just a whole extra process. I've done it both ways and I prefer raw pack. Now, what I like to do to make this super efficient is I know that if I'm using these wide mouth jars, I can fit 18 wide mouth jars in my canner. I'm going to be canning chicken. I want to do exactly 18 at a time because to me, it's not very efficient to run the canner multiple times in one day. Because as you know, canning is a whole process. It takes a long time. And at the very end, once it's all done and you've turned the stove off, you have to wait for the pressure to come completely down before opening the stove. And I find that after all of that, it almost just makes sense to wait for a different day and run the canner. So that's what I like to do, one canner at a time, unless you have multiple canners. Then of course you could do multiple loads. But that's the quickest way for me, is I just do one load at a time, and I put as many as I can fit in at a time. And chicken with me. Today we are raw packing chicken thighs. So I am going to start by chopping up the chicken thighs into big chunks so that I can get them in the jar. I'm also removing the fat because I don't want the fat in the jar. That could inhibit a seal. So I am just going to push this chicken into the jar. We're not adding any liquid. That's it, just chicken. It will make broth on its own, which you'll see after these come out of the canner. So once I get all of the jars full, I'm going to wipe the rims. Then we need to get a lid and a ring on each one of these. We want these rings finger tight, which is a little bit tighter than you would think, but you're not cranking too hard. If you don't tighten them enough, they will not seal, which you don't want. So once these all have the lids and rings on, we're going to get these in the canner and then put the lid on. This needs to vent for 10 minutes before we can get it going up to pressure. And so here is what it looks like when it's venting. And then we are going to get our weight on, and we need to have this come up to 15 pounds of pressure. And once it finishes processing, we can let it come down naturally all the way to 0, take the lid off. I like to let it steam out a little bit before I take the lid all the way off. And then we can take our jars out of the canner. Now, we don't want to touch these for a full 24 hours to make sure that they seal, but after then we can check to see how many seals we have. And here is the final product. Now, I like to use this chicken in multiple different ways. Of course, buffalo chicken dip comes to mind because that is just delicious. I also like to put this kind of chicken in the Instant Pot with some noodles to make like a chicken Alfredo. This is also really good for like a barbecue chicken. I also love this in soups. My favorite curry soup, I prefer to have canned chicken in it. There's so many different ways. Basically, anytime you would use cooked chicken, you can use this chicken. It's just personal preference for the texture and flavor that you want in each meal. Next up, similar to chicken, is pork. Pork is another thing that I would stock up on and can. I do it the exact same way as chicken, raw pack. My favorite way to do this is to buy a whole pork roast when they're on sale for 99 cents a pound, if they ever go on sale for 99 cents a pound again. Maybe $1.99 is the number that we want to aim for, but that is a bone-in pork roast. I just cut around the bone and make the pieces small enough to fit inside. We're going to pack it just like the chicken, raw pack, no broth needed, no extra fuss. Just put it all in here, and then you also have the bone for later that you can make broth with. When you are canning meat, you can either raw or hot pack your meat. Hot pack means you cook it first and then you put broth over the top of it, hot broth. Or raw packing is where you just put your meat into the jars raw. And so what I'm doing here is I am cutting the meat off of the bones and then putting it into the jar. And we are going to make sure that we have 1-inch headspace, and all that's going to be in the jar is the meat. And then as the meat cooks, it will create the broth. And so we're going to follow the same process that we have been by getting the meat to about 1 inch of headspace, no extra liquid needed for raw packing. And then once we have that, we will get the lids and rings on, making sure to wipe the rims first, and then we will get these into the canner, and these are going to process for 75 minutes if it's pints and 90 minutes if it's quarts. Now we want to make sure to let this vent for 10 minutes, and you can see right here it's just starting to vent, the steam is coming out. So after 10 minutes of letting it vent, we will put the weight on it and then wait until it gets all the way up in pressure, and then it has to stay at that pressure for the 75 or 90 minutes. And then we will turn the heat off and let the pressure come down completely on its own until it's at 0. And then we are good to take the lid off. And again, I do like to just kind of prop it on top to let a lot of that steam come out. And I use those yellow gloves because it avoids me getting steam burns, because I have been burned by the steam before. So we are taking these out of the canner, and we need to leave them there until the next day. And then the next day we will come through and remove all of the rings and check all the seals. And then we will get these completely washed. We want to wash all of our jars before putting them away, because we don't want to have any food on the outsides that could potentially bring in rodents or any other type of bugs. And it's just nice to have everything clean, right? So we will write on them what they are and the date and year after we make sure that they are sealed. So pork is something that's taken me a little longer to figure out how to use it. Something that I love to do is make pulled pork, of course. Just add barbecue sauce, put it on top of mac and cheese, put it on a bun. But something that I recently did for the first time and I found was a great way to use this pork is I used it for ramen. And I've never made ramen before. I mean, I've made, of course, instant ramen when I was a teenager, but I'd never made like legit ramen, and it was so good. So now I have another way to use this pork, and I'm so excited for it. So let me know down below, what are your favorite ways to use canned pork? Because I only really have those 2 applications that I love using it in, and I would like some more suggestions, but it is so good that it is worth keeping it on my pantry shelf. And of course, you could also can beef this way. I'm not the biggest fan of the beef texture. I only really like it in stews, but if you do like it, of course, go for it. Now, of course, we just talked about saving the bones from meat. Something that I like to do is save the bones from the turkey every year at Thanksgiving or Easter whenever you eat your turkey. Of course, do the same with chicken, but we don't typically have chicken bones on anything that we eat. So turkey stock is something that I like to make a big batch at a time. I put it in a roaster. I basically just have a whole big day of it, and I make 1 canner load's worth. Now, you can't really tell how much you're making when you're just putting the water in. It's going to evaporate a little bit. So if there's extra, a lot of times I will freeze the extra for the next time I do a batch, or I'll just use it from frozen. But I don't do anything really special to my broth. I used to put different vegetable scraps in it, and then I learned that some vegetable scraps could have like particles on it that could make it unsafe, so I just stopped doing that altogether. And I found that it doesn't really affect the flavor at all. The color might be a little bit different because, of course, onion peels make for a darker broth, but the taste is great. I do add salt. That's the one thing that I add, but otherwise it's just bones, salt, and that's it. And I do make sure my bones are roasted, so if it's a turkey, the turkey's already gone into the oven, and so the turkey was roasted. But if it's something like a beef bone, I would roast that first. When you are canning, of course, make sure you are following a safe and tested recipe. What I'm doing right here is I am roasting the bones before I start making the broth, and I actually took all the meat that I could off the bones and then started roasting them. I got a little bit of water in the bottom of that roaster pan because as the drippings were dripping down, they were starting to burn, and I didn't want that to happen. But once my bones were roasted, I put some water over the top of them just until they were covered, and then I let those boil overnight on kind of a low simmer, and I just wanted to get that flavor all the way through. Now you want to make sure to not add too much water when you're canning, because otherwise you will have a very mild broth flavor. And then salt is optional, and you could also throw in different veggie scraps if you would like. I actually prefer not to put veggie scraps in my stock. That way I don't have certain flavors in case that's not the flavor that I'm wanting. So what I'm doing here is I am ladling the stock into my fat separator, and this is a very important step in canning, is to make sure not to be canning a ton of fat. It could really inhibit your seals. And so I am going to get as much as I can into this fat separator, which is 4 cups. And then that little red stopper at the top of it is meant to help keep the liquids down in there, and so that all the fat comes to the top. So I'm straining the broth as it goes into this container. You could also get a bigger strainer and put the strainer inside of the tub and then grab the liquid from within the strainer. You could strain it that way too. But I need to let this sit now for a few minutes so that all the fat comes to the top. And you can kind of see that thin fat layer at the top. That's what we don't want to add into our jar. So I am pouring this into the jar, and I need 1 inch of headspace. And so once we get up right about to an inch, that's when I stop. And that first rim is about an inch. The second rim is about a half an inch. And the little markings on the tops. So I am then going to get my next set going. This is just the process that I like to take. This doesn't exactly affect safety. It just affects how long it takes. And I'm going to let this one sit and have all the fat come to the top while I deal with the jars that I have. So then I will be putting the lids and rings on after wiping the rims. Now, when you're dealing with something that's greasy or sticky, you want to make sure to wipe the rims with vinegar, because vinegar will cut that down and make it to where those pieces are not on your lids. If there's anything on your lid, then you'll have a hard time getting it to seal, and we do not want that. So we're going to get our lid on and our ring on, and then these are going to go into the canner, and you want to get them finger tight, which is not just barely twisting them. You twist them a little bit more than you would think, but don't over crank them, because then you'll have your seals buckle. But also, if you don't twist them enough, then you'll end up having them just not seal. So here I am making sure that I am checking my recipe, because you always want to be canning with your recipe. And so I am not going to process this until I know exactly how long I need to process it for. And so I did put those in, and I let the canner vent, which is a very important thing to do. It vents for 10 minutes, and then you bring it up to the pressure that you need, and then you let it cook for as long as it needs. For me on this day, I did 20 minutes at 13 pounds is my requirement, but I did 15 pounds because that's the weight that I have. And then you saw me leave the lid on there once I took it off. I did make sure that the canner came all the way down in pressure before I released the lid. And then I let it sit for a while to let the steam come out, because I wanted to make sure that the steam was not going to just come out all at once and cause harm to the jars or to me. So then I took my jars out, and they need to sit there for 24 hours, and then tomorrow we will check them. This is probably my favorite thing to have on my pantry shelf. I used to only use a bouillon cube, but those have a lot of added ingredients that I don't really want to be putting into my body because they give me migraines. And you guys, it's a couple bucks to get a jar this size at the store. It can be up to $5 to get a quart of this at the store. I mean, of course, you could probably find it on sale a lot cheaper, but that's expensive considering I get a whole canner's load plus for basically free. All I have to do is buy the lids, which are 10 cents a piece. This is like a steal. If you're someone who buys your own broth, consider making it, because it literally saves all of the money that it costs to get it. So this is definitely one of my favorite things to can ever. I use this the most out of everything, and it's my favorite. The next thing that I would can to stock my pantry, of course, is beans. So I like to can all different kind of plain beans. These are Great Northern beans, these are black beans, these are chickpeas. All of these beans cook for the same amount of time and at the same pressure. So if you don't want a full canner's load of black beans or a full canner's load of Great Northern beans or pinto beans or any type of beans, you don't have to. You can do a little bit of each kind, which is fantastic. So I could do, bottom layer of one, top layer of another, or mix and match. We do need to follow a safe and tested process. So what you want to do is you want to pre-soak your beans, either by soaking overnight or doing a quick soak in the morning. And then we need to boil our beans for 30 minutes and then top them with broth. And then we will put them in the canner and process them. These are so convenient. And let me tell you, They make for much better digestion than the ones from the stores. These are so much better on my stomach. I don't have as many bubbles in my tummy, if you know what I mean. And they taste delicious. Now, there are a lot of recipes going around online, especially on YouTube, of how you just put beans in a jar and then add water and can them. That is not technically the safe and tested process. And I did do that when I first started canning because I did not know that there was a difference between just canning and safe and tested. And honestly, quality-wise, doing it the safe and tested way, 10 out of 10 for me. And the other way, I was like, this is okay, but not great. They weren't very soft. The other way was not for me. This is far superior to me. The taste, the quality, the texture, everything about it. Take the extra time, follow the recipe as it's written. You will be very happy with the outcome. So here's how to can beans. To can beans, we start by soaking our beans overnight, and then the morning of, you need to drain and rinse your beans, and then we will boil these for 30 minutes. Once they are done boiling for 30 minutes, then we will be able to start the canning process. And the way that I like to get my jar set up anytime that I'm canning is I like to get really, really hot water in the jars, and I like to have them just set on the side of my counter, because then they're ready for me and they're not too hot, but they're hot enough to where they won't break with the hot items going into the jars. So then I take the beans and I am straining the water out and only putting the beans in the jar. We need to get to 1 inch headspace. And then once I am done getting the beans to 1 inch headspace, I will put water, boiling water in from a different pot over the top. So this is clean boiling water. You could add in spices or you could add in salt if you would like. I usually leave mine plain. That's kind of the theme. I leave a lot of things plain as I'm canning just because then I can use it however I want to later. And what's really important here is that once you get the water in your jar, you need to debubble, which means taking something and sticking it into the jar to get all of the bubbles out of the jar, and your headspace needs to be proper after debubbling. And then we finish the process just like we always would by wiping our rims, putting a lid on it, and then putting the ring on it, getting it in the canner, and then canning. And for the beans, the processing time for pints is 75 minutes and quarts is 90 minutes. These do take a lot longer. And the elevation that I'm at, which is mile high, I need 13 pounds of pressure, but I always use 15 because that's the weight that I have. And last up, as we're stocking our pantry, this Stocktober is a take on what we just did. It's still beans, but these are flavored beans. So there are quite a few tested recipes for flavored beans, and you can add spices to any recipe. And as long as it's a dry spice, it doesn't change anything about the safety of the product. So something that I like to do is make, well, 2 different kinds. I don't have any baked beans here, but I do love to make baked beans because they are just quick, easy, and ready to go. But I haven't found a recipe I super love yet. So if you have a great baked bean recipe, please link it down below for me. These, though, are refried beans. Now, I know what you're thinking, Carrie, you can't can refried beans. You're right, you cannot can mashed up refried beans, but what you can do is can beans that are whole with all of the spices for refried beans. So I call these basically chili beans or refried beans. I kind of use them interchangeably. So if I have a recipe that calls for chili beans, I'll use them whole. And if I have a recipe that calls for refried beans, all I do is I dump it out into a bowl and I mash it. And then I have instant refried beans. It is fantastic. I, of course, will heat it up on the stove if it's a recipe that needs to be heated. Something that I love to do with these is make burrito casserole. It's a cream of chicken soup with sour cream and then layered tortilla, refried beans, taco meat, and then you relayer it, add cheese, and it's so delicious. I don't heat them on the stove in that instance because I'm going to put it in the oven and they'll get heated through there. So anytime I want refried beans just on their own, I will mash them first and then put them on my stove so I don't scratch the pot. And then I will heat them all the way through, and then we will have some delicious refried beans. So beans are one of the few things that I actually put on my shelf with flavor, unlike the meat where I decided it was better to just do the flavor after the fact. So this is a go-to for me. I didn't mention how much I'm starting with. For these pinto beans, I started with 4 pounds. Canning flavored beans starts out the exact same way as canning any non-flavored bean. The only difference is that once you've got your beans in the water, you're going to add all of the different flavors to the water that you're boiling the beans in. And then once you have all the flavors together, you're going to let that simmer for a while. And then the process continues as normal. You fill your jars and then do the canner process just the same. And then there they are. These are all fantastic ways to stock up your pantry this Stocktober. These are quick, easy, and these are my favorite things to can. These are my go-tos. These are what I use most often. If you are wanting that quick win and wanting to get your pantry stocked as quickly as possible, even though it's canning, and canning does take a little bit of time, these are what I would choose. These are the least tedious things to can, in my opinion, and they have great flavor and they're so versatile you can use them for anything. So if you are participating in Stocktober this year, let me know down below. Also, let me know what your favorite go-tos to can are. If you're wanting to jump into canning but you just haven't yet, I will make sure to leave a video over here with some beginner information about canning. And for those of you who just want to laugh, I will link 5 things that I regret canning here. Thanks so much for being here. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're new here and haven't yet, please subscribe. I'd love to see you. And I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.